Hi, my name is Jenny Lauren Dowden for Conduit News, and today we are joined with Professor Robert Steinbuch. He is a University of Arkansas Little Rock law professor, but today he is here representing his own views and perspective. Hi, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with Conduit.
I'm so interested to hear what you have to say about what's been happening over the past couple of days at the Capitol in Little Rock. It has been certainly interesting to say the least. Let's just jump right in it. A lot has been happening regarding the vaccine mandates and employers' rights. Just first of all, give me off the top of your head your first reaction on what's been happening the past couple of days.
Well, I see a lot of good proposals from those, what I would call pure conservatives who are most concerned about our freedoms. I tend to divide up those in the legislature into several groups. We'll see how many it turns out to be. But I have sort of the freedom-loving conservative group is the one that I tend to align myself with. And they're concerned about maintaining our freedoms. And they're so concerned about maintaining freedoms that includes, of course, the freedom of speech, irrespective of whether the speech is pro-conservative, pro-liberal, pro-anything. And that's a true commitment to freedom. Then you have these kind of what I call chamber conservatives, who I believe are a little too tied to the Chamber of Commerce. I think the chamber actually does some things well, and I think it does some things very poorly. And you see them expressing their views in the legislature, saying things like, well, businesses should be entitled to do whatever they want to do. And then you have the lefties. And the lefties don't particularly have a political philosophy. Their philosophy is, what outcome do I want to achieve? And I will craft some pretextual theory around this particular act to justify it, and I'll change it for the next act. So I don't particularly address their arguments because they're usually nonsense. The challenge, I believe, that that middle group has, the overly deferential to business conservative group, is that they severely overstate their position. Say, well, you know, conservatives believe in businesses having the freedom, they like to co-opt that term, to do what they want to do. Okay, I mean, I think that there's something to that, right? You run a store or a restaurant, you can put up a sign, no shirts, no shoes, no service, right? That's the old sort of adage. We also recognize the right as conservatives that if you don't want to be involved in a particular event, we saw this with the famous wedding cake case, that you shouldn't be compelled if that contradicts your religious beliefs. But we also recognize that business is constrained in what they can do, and businesses, we don't want to overreach when it comes to things outside their purview. Of course, we know well that businesses can't say no to customers if they're Jewish or if they're Black or a whole host of other categories. And that's good. And we support that form of regulation. So there's a very big example of where when business says, well, we can do whatever we want to do. Well, no, you can't. That's a pretty good example, right? And so why? Because that's a recognition of certain civil liberties of those workers, right? You can't refuse to hire someone because of their religion, their race, etc. You can't refuse to serve someone for the same reasons, right? We recognize those customers and those employees' civil liberties. I have a right to practice my religion, happens to be Judaism, irrespective of what an employer wants. And if an employer fires me for that, they've got a problem. Well, guess what? I would argue, and of course, the freedom-loving conservatives that I referred to a moment ago in the legislature agree with this. I would like to exercise my right to decide what goes in my body. So I would like to exercise my right to decide whether I get a vaccine. To be clear, I have been vaccinated. I actually, as a teacher, am entitled to be 3 times vaccinated, and I have been 3 times vaccinated. So I have no opposition to the vaccine on a voluntary basis. But that I choose to put the vaccine in my body doesn't mean I should be able to compel you to be vaccinated. The same way, I couldn't imagine my employer telling me I must eat broccoli every night. I don't want to eat broccoli every night. I don't like broccoli. So that's the point here. And freedom is a notion from the beginning of this country that has been at the pinnacle of our priorities. And so when I hear falsely some like, well, aren't you concerned about life? Of course we're concerned about life, and we're concerned about freedom. And these businesses seem to want to dictate what people do in their free time, what vaccine they get at home. And so a colleague of mine who I respect and debate often said, well, you see, the businesses want to protect their workers from getting sick. So it's actually about what takes place at the job. Well, as I said, I've been vaccinated and I wear a mask at work. We're mandated to wear masks at work. For now, we'll talk about that case from Northwest Arkansas that clearly does say indeed that they can no longer mandate us. Whether that applies across counties is an interesting question. In any event, coming back to this is, so I wear a mask and I'm vaccinated. So if someone else is not vaccinated at my job and comes in to my job, how much have they increased the chances that I catch COVID from everybody being vaccinated at my job? Actually, very small. I don't know the exact number. I'm not sure we know that exact number, but it's a very, very small number because the single best protection is the vaccine. The second best protection actually is to open windows and doors. I don't know if we discussed that on a previous show about how the school has refused to allow me to open the door in my classroom. CDC says it's a good idea. The response I got from the school was, well, that's for K through 12. You know, Ginny, because the air in K through 12 is somehow different than the buildings that we use for higher education. In any event, coming back, the third best thing to do to prevent catching COVID is to wear an N95 mask. Not the paper masks that they give out at most places, not a KN95 mask, but an N95 mask. I wear an N95 mask. So if I do those things, the odds of me catching COVID are quite low. And the change in odds, the delta of having the people around me vaccinated is very small. So we are then presented with a question. Do I get to impose my will, not mine to be clear, but I say that sort of from the leftist perspective, do the leftists get to impose their will that everybody be vaccinated on everyone for a delta that's tiny? I think freedom allows each individual to make that choice. And that's why I support the Freedom Conservative Coalition in the legislature that exists today.
Yeah, freedom seemed to take a big hit today when Senate Bill 731 failed in the House. We saw all week long it passed through the Senate, through the Public Health Committee. It was considered germane within the resolution to be heard. It seemed like it was going to go through, and when we watched it on the House floor today, it just seemed as though there were tactics in play for it not to go through. It was sent back to the Rules Committee. And as I was watching it, I was just thinking in my head, like, you've got to be kidding me. A lot of representatives paired their votes. They were thinking, we're just going to make this simple vote to get this bill to go through. It's going to pass. Senator Ballinger even even made the comment in a video on Facebook the night before, this is going to pass. And then this happened on the floor this morning. And it just seemed like to a lot of people, these are just the old tricks in the book to not get this bill through. And at one point, there were even conversations that people were, that people wanted to put an amendment in to pull out healthcare workers, that they would be exempt, not covered in this. And it's like, it's just one hit after another on, really on freedom, on liberty. And it's like, what's going on here? What are your thoughts on that? Like what you're seeing in this landscape, in this political landscape?
Yeah, there's a lot of use of process going on that is unusual to achieve the outcomes. Now you can do that, right? And here's an interesting example. So one of these bills that I believe has passed also had an emergency clause. And as you know, but for your audience, an emergency clause says that the bill takes effect immediately rather than in 90 days. Right. And that's important for these types of bills. And the bill itself passed, and the bill itself only needs a majority. But an emergency clause requires a supermajority. I forget what the percentage is. Let's say 75. Yeah. 24 out of 35, so it's about 75%. I don't know what the, right? Mm-hmm. So you need that 75% to enact the emergency clause. Some Republicans voted against the underlying bill. Okay, they were against it. And while I disagree with them, if they're against it, they're going to vote against the bill. Then the bill passes. Okay, they lost. And then they voted against the emergency clause. And so why would you vote against the emergency clause? I mean, the bill is going to go into effect. So you want to hold it up from going into effect for 90 days because that's how desperately you want to hold on to your position. Normally what takes place in the legislature is if the bill that you opposed passes, but the bill was sponsored by your caucus, meaning in this case, Republicans, well, then you say, okay, you guys won. So if you want it to happen now, I'll support your emergency clause. But that didn't happen here. And so, yes, process has been used quite significantly. Now, the opponents will say, well, I don't like the bill, and I really don't like the bill. So the longer I can hold it off, the better we are. Right. You're entitled to do that. It just shows you that process has been a significant factor in the outcomes that we've seen so far. For example, when Tim Fox issued his unconstitutional order saying that the law passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, that prevents state agencies from mandating masks, when Tim Fox said that's unconstitutional, by the way, in a sentence, that the analysis in that order, a sentence. When he said that, of course, that's now up on appeal, and Tim Fox could have stayed his order, right? He could have said, I think it's unconstitutional, but since it's passed, since it's a law, I'm going to let the law stand until the appellate court decides it. No, he didn't stay his order. Why? Because process is very important right now, particularly to the lefties that are holding on with desperation to keep their mandates in place for as long as they can. Tim Fox's order, I think, will be ultimately overturned, but in the meantime, we have a long period in which people's freedoms are restricted. Now, here's the other interesting thing, and this was a point that I know you want to get to. Up in Northwest, there was a lawsuit in which Greg Payne was the attorney, and some school district, one of the school districts, they all did, I think, mandate masks. Yeah. And Greg sued for several clients saying, well, you can't mandate the mask. And one of their arguments was, now they would have been able to simply say, well, that's against the law, but Tim Fox sort of canceled that law. Well, that's actually a little bit more complicated because Tim Fox is in Pulaski County, and there's an argument that Tim Fox's ruling only applies to Pulaski County. But that's a sort of complicated legal question. Does it apply to the whole state, or does it just apply to Pulaski County? Okay. So the state behaved, or various localities throughout the state behaved as if Tim Fox's decision applies throughout the state. Okay. Well, Greg just won that case because the court up there in the, is it the Fayetteville area? I forget what,
Benton County.
thank you, Benton County.
Mhm.
You know, I'll learn those 75 counties probably when I'm 75 years old. But in any event, so he won the case in which the judge said, well, the only person who is authorized to issue a mask mandate is the
Mhm.
governor, not school
Right.
districts. The governor
Mhm.
can't give that power to the school districts. And more importantly, he hasn't given that power to the
Mhm.
school districts. And so that judge up there, I forget her name, but made a sound decision, said that mandate is out.
Mhm.
Well, if that's the case, if her ruling is that localities cannot mandate masks without only the governor can,
Right.
and indeed, therefore, I would think neither can higher education, meaning the Department of Education. That
Yeah.
is, it must come from the governor himself, that every one of the mask mandates throughout the state for public entities, according to the logic that we have followed, or at least localities have followed so far regarding Tim Fox's order, every one of those mandates is dead on arrival until the governor does something.
Well, and that's so interesting. So, and I'm surely it's just purely coincidental that the day after that ruling came out, all of a sudden, Rogers Public School, their numbers all of a sudden were low enough for them to make mask optional. But what do you think we'll start seeing now from public schools? Do you think they'll, say, oh, you know what, maybe we're not in compliance with, with this, and maybe we should also follow suit? I mean, what do you think should happen? Do you think, public schools should now, make masks optional? Do you think more parents should reach out to their public schools, send this lawsuit, the court ruling to their administrators and let them know? I mean, what do you think should happen?
For sure, I think that parents who don't want their kids to be masked should raise this issue with their localities, their school districts. And if the school district insists on claiming that their mandate is legal, that those parents should sue.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, if I had a kid, I don't, and I sent them to school today, I would consider putting a mask on him and or her. I don't know if I would, but I would certainly actually put the mask on, but I certainly would consider it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so those parents who want their kids to wear masks probably don't care about suing to remove the mandate. But if you don't want your kid to wear a mask, then you should raise the issue with your school board and your school district, and you should sue if they don't comply.
I think it's just about freedom of choice, right? Like that's what this is about. Parents having freedom of choice to put their child in a mask or not, and not being mandated, not being told, going back to the vaccination, you have to put this in your body. You have to put your child in a mask every single day. It's about having the choice, of what you get to do. That's what this all comes down to again.
When kids wear masks, they're remarkably ineffective. They're not entirely ineffective.
Oh, it's ridiculous. They're disgusting.
Yeah, they're disgusting. What they're good for is catching a sneeze. They will reduce the transmission from a sneeze or a wet cough, but that's it. They're not going to stop the kid from catching virtually anything, but they stop the sort of aerosolization of a sneeze or a cough from a sick kid. Here's the thing: your kid's sneezing or coughing in today's environment, why are you sending your kid to school?
Yeah.
That's really the interesting part. Don't send your kid to school if you're sneezing and coughing. And if you don't, then the masks serve no additional purposes. Kids can't wear effectively N95 masks. They'll pull them off. They N95 go around the head. They have not the hard, but the firm seal.
Yeah.
Kids can't wear those. They're going to pull them off in a minute. So they wear these cloth or paper masks. They do, like I say, other than the sneeze or the cough, largely nothing. So that's, a lot of this is COVID theater. Like we used to have 9/11 theater, fake security. You'd line up outdoors to go through a metal detector. And meanwhile, you were an open target if a terrorist actually wanted to do something because you lined up outdoors. Oh yeah, but the 3 people in the building, they were perfectly safe. And then you would see, of course, people would take their cup of coffee. That wouldn't go through the x-ray machine because it's a metal cup. Of course, you could secrete something in the metal cup. So there are all ways around the so-called security because it's theater. It's not real. And that's a lot of what's going on here.
Yeah, speaking of like COVID fear and COVID mania and, mandating the vaccines, I saw an article recently, a patient was rejected a transplant because they had not had the vaccine. And to me, that's just,
I saw that. I said, no, it was worse than that. They took him off the list. They said, you're off the list.
That's right.
You're off the list.
And so, I'm seeing all of this amidst, legislation that's happening. A lot of our, Republicans not standing up and fighting for, our Arkansans. And I'm just thinking, where are we headed? And this, we can wrap up with this, but where do you see things heading right now?
It's a great question. And I'm going to give you a slightly different answer than the most direct answer.
Okay.
Here's where I want to see things happen,
Okay.
the way I want to see things happen. I want to see the good folks of Arkansas and good people like the folks at Conduit support freedom-loving conservatives.
Yeah.
And I know Conduit does. That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
And the truth is that most of what happens in politics in Arkansas these days happens at the primary level. One Republican running against another Republican.
Yeah.
Yes, we have some Democratic districts for the state senates and the state House of Representatives, and they largely stay Democratic. I live in a Democratic district, in fact, and it will largely stay Democratic. Now, it may be redrawn and then it'll be a whole new ballgame, but for now, it'll be a Democratic district. In the Republican districts, we have some freedom-loving Republicans, and we have some who are not. And they are, as I described, be overly business-friendly, overly government-friendly, overly deferential to whatever the administrative state does. And if you look at the bills that they pass, they are bills that some government agency walks in and says, hey, can you run this bill? Think about this. So a government agency says, hey, we want more power and less oversight. Because that's all they ask for, Jimmy.
Government agency at every single committee meeting, lined up.
Of course you did. And by the way, guess who pays for those lobbyists? For the government agency. You do, and I do.
Yep.
And so they walk these bills into these legislators, and the legislators march, these bad legislators march like toy soldiers into the committee meetings and sponsor these bills.
Right.
Those are not conservatives. They're Republicans, and they got to be booted out. They got to be booted out. And I'm happy to go through some names. Jane English is an example of that here. I live in Little Rock, and she's right across the river in North Little Rock. I think we should have Tim Griffin's chief of staff, who's now a state rep, whose name I forget. Oh my goodness, I know him very well. He's a state rep. I want him to run. That's why I'm telling you. I can't remember his name, and he's gonna rightfully, after he watches this video, call me up and say, Rob, how do you not know my name? But I want him to run against Jane English because he's a rep out in that area. Sturch. I forget how. James Sturch. He needs to be primary. Sorry, because he ain't voting conservative, right? So we need to stand up to these folks who are not pursuing true conservative values. Lance Eads, sorry, not doing a good job as far as I'm concerned. And we need conservatives to pay attention and say, our elections take place in the primaries, and we need to make sure that a true conservative is going to win. My friend and colleague, and often you hear him on the radio with me when we do morning radio, as you know. That's Chris
I heard
Corbett.
you guys this morning.
Thank you. Good. So you were the other listener. No, I'm teasing. Chris Corbett, he's an engineer, he's an attorney over there in Conway. What county is that again, Jimmy? You help me out.
Faulkner.
Thank you. By the way, there's a Conway County, and Conway ain't in it. Anyway,
Yeah.
So he's going to run for Senate in what was Jason Rayford's seat, or currently is Jason Rayford's seat. To be clear, he's running for lieutenant governor, as you well know. And so these are the kind of conservatives that we need in office.
Yes, totally agree. Well, listen, it is always a pleasure having you here with Conduit, and we hope to have you on again very soon. Thank you so much for your wonderful insight.
Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you again.
Okay, talk soon.